Um, the the incident involved an estranged father who had, against a violation of a court order, had abducted his son from his common law wife, and he barricaded himself in his particular neighborhood in his home, and he had refused contact for most of the night. The only time that we actually made contact with him on the phone was for him to pick up the phone and say, "Everything she told you is a lie. Go away. I don't need you here. I'm at home with my son. I didn't call you. Goodbye." And from that point on, there was no contact with him verbally. We spent the entire night trying to establish contact with him. We knew he was still alive. We could see lights going on and off inside the house over the course of the night. And then he ultimately fell asleep. Now, we were trying to figure out different ways to convince him to surrender. But with somebody that's not responding, it's very difficult to influence them in that regard. And then sunrise comes the next morning. I sent my team home. My team was ordered to go home to get some rest because they had worked all day the previous day and then all night on this problem. And about an hour after they left, I left. And then at about 2:00 in the afternoon, my team supervisor called me because I had gone home and tried to get some rest. Obviously, it didn't work out very well. But she called me and said, "You got to get back here because things are getting crazy." And I get back there, and I could tell that the energy in the air had changed. I describe it in the book as, it was like, when a storm's coming, a thunderstorm is coming, because you can smell it in the air before the first raindrop hits. The wind starts to pick up, and the leaves start to turn over, and that's the kind of feeling that I got when I arrived back at the scene. And when I got on to the command bus, it was chaos. And that's not where you want chaos, is in the command bus. That's the think tank. That's where the decisions are being made. And there was just chaos. And I approached one of the incident commanders that had worked the previous day. And I said, what's going on? And he goes, we're going to have another team come in and relieve our SWAT guys so they can get some rest, because we're going to execute a hostage rescue. And there's hostage rescue. There are not two more ominous words when you're dealing with this type of event, because that is one of the two places within a hostage taking event where the hostages are in the most jeopardy. They're in the most jeopardy when they're first taken, and then when we go in and try to save them, that's when they're also in jeopardy. So I explained that to him, and I asked him what changed. And he said, we're not sure how much longer the kid is going to remain unharmed. So I told him that everything that we have uncovered indicated that this kid was going to be fine with his father unless and until somebody tried to get in between him and the father. So again, what changed? SWAT guys are concerned about the long gun that was behind the front door of the house. I said, we knew about the long gun this morning. What changed? Mental health said that he may be suicidal. I said, well, mental health was saying that early this morning. So what has changed? Trying to get him to think. And ultimately, he told me, we're not going to let this go into another night, which is crazy when you're thinking about someone being held by someone else, that you're going to let time dictate what actions that you're going to take. And so had I done a better job at articulating what I knew when I knew it, as far as mental health was concerned, what our threat assessment was, as far as the relationship between the boy and the father, and my assessment of the long gun, the shoulder fired weapon that they thought was behind the front door. Had I done a better job at doing it, at relaying that information, maybe what occurred might not have occurred, or the decision making that was leading up to them considering a hostage rescue, which is, as I said, one of the most dangerous things you can do. The decision making may have been a little bit different. Now, to be clear, the actual shoot was justified. There's no way around it. He came out. He came out. He's the one that elected to come out with the gun. He's the one that elected not to drop the gun, and as a result, he's no longer with us. So I'm not taking issue with the shoot. I'm taking issue with all of this decision making that was made up until the actual shoot. It went against policy, procedure, and it went against best practices. And the only reason that it went that way is because I didn't do enough to address what I talk about in the book. I didn't do enough to address the egos that were in the room. So,
do you blame yourself ultimately for the result?
No. I got a clear slate, clear conscience on the result, because the decision ultimately in any of these events, the decision on whether they come out vertical or horizontal is theirs. At any point in any of these incidents, the person on the inside can put their weapon down and walk out, and nothing physically is going to happen to them. So I absolve myself of any guilt that might be attached with that. Where I kick myself is not doing enough to tamp down the egos that were in the room, not calling it out as I saw it start to rear its ugly head. And in part, it could have been because I didn't believe it. You know, the concept that I'm talking about, there's a name for this. It's called the action imperative. And the action imperative is when someone starts to exude influence on the process in order to, quote, speed things up. And it had been taught to me before. I had heard about it before. I had never seen it in action. And so I was as much awestruck by what I was seeing as anything else. And so I was probably stunned, and that's probably what impeded my cognitive ability at that point. But in hindsight, there was ample opportunity for me to ask those questions sooner. Why are we thinking about doing that? What are we hoping to accomplish? You know, there was one point where they were going to break and rake a window to get a response from the guy. And I'm thinking to myself, you know, what response do you think you're going to get from this guy? You go up and break and rake his window with a robot. What response do you think you're going to get from him? He's going to wind up shooting the robot, or something worse. He's going to think it's an actual assault, and he's going to take the kid's life and then ultimately take his own. So that's what I have guilt about. That's what I kick myself about, by not addressing the ego that was involved in the decision making sooner.
Mm-hmm. So when ego does rear its ugly head, what are some strategies that you've learned over the years to subdue it?
That's a good question. Recognize it for what it is. Ego is an emotion. It's tied to your self-preservation. Self-preservation is an instinct that all of us possess. And when our ego is encroached, we get defensive because whatever is encroaching our ego is a threat. And what happens when there is a threat? That group of cells at the base of your brain fires up. It activates, and it blocks your executive functioning. Everything that's supposed to go on in the prefrontal cortex doesn't go on because you're operating from a highly emotional state. I know for a fact now, and this comes after years of just doing what I do, that I'm going to be challenged. I'm going to be affronted. I'm going to be attacked. I'm going to be offended. How do you respond to that? Your ego will tell you to respond negatively. Your ego will tell you to respond and attack back. And the problem with attacking back is now you've put your counterpart, whoever is challenging your ego, into a negative state. And now their amygdala is fired up. Now you got two people with fired up amygdalas trying to have a conversation. And so mentally preparing myself that the ego is going to show up. It's not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, your ego and authority should be on display at times. When are those times? When it's an emergency situation or time is of the essence. There's a certain level of exigency that you need to consider. The analogy I like to use is when the enemy is inside the wire and you're passing out the last rounds of ammunition. As a leader, your ego and authority should be on display because lives are hanging in the balance. You're up against a deadline before the opportunity to close this deal is realized. Your ego and authority better be on display so that you can get the things that you need lined up to make your opportunity a success. The problem with ego and authority is we don't operate in an exigent environment 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so the challenge is, how do you tamp it down? How do you turn it off? And the first way to do that is to say to yourself, literally say to yourself the mantra, it's not about me. It's about the other side. And as soon as you start to look at every difficult situation, every interaction that way, you start to subordinate yourself. Subconsciously, you start to subordinate yourself to the other side. And so it's all a mental game, as we talked about when we kicked this phone call off. It's all a mental state. And so I know for a fact, do I have the authority to make you do something? Yes, I do. If you're my direct report, yes, I do. And my ego will tell me, I'll just go in there and tell Jay, do it because I said so. Mm-hmm. But who wants to work around a person who is just issuing orders and pushing people around? Not many people do. Follows that age-old adage that people don't leave jobs, they leave bosses because of ego and authority. So that's a long way to answer the question, how do I manage it? I recognize the fact that I don't know everything. I recognize the fact that the people that are associated with me are talented people. They've got skills. So get out of their way and let them do their job. And know when it's appropriate to exercise your ego and authority. 99% of the time, it doesn't need to be on display.